We continue now at the top of Daf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph Mesechet Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 83a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing whether a Kohen sheshimesh betuma, if a Kohen serves in the Beis HaMikdash and he is tamei, is he chayev misa b'dei shamayim or not? And the Gemara is in the middle of bringing a proof from a brisa. The brisa is describing various avodos in the Beis HaMikdash and says for these particular avodos, there's no chiyav lo mishum zaros, not for the issue of a zar serving in that fashion, a non-Kohen, v'lo mishum tumah, not an issue of tumah, v'lo mishum mechusar begadim. And again, with these specific avodos, we'll see Rashi in a moment, there's no issue of mechusar begadim, of not wearing the proper clothing that the Kohen is supposed to wear when he serves in the Beis HaMikdash. V'lo mishum richutz yadayim v'raglayim, and also let's say he didn't wash his hands and feet. Again, there's not going to be that liability. And Rashi explains, Lo misham zarus, there's no chiyuv in terms of if he is a non-Kohen, zar sha'asa achas mehem bifnim. If the zar does one of these kinds of avodas that we just listed, if he does them in the Beis HaMikdash, eino chayev misa, he's not going to be chayev misa. The nafkalan b'seder yuma meva avadatem avodas matana v'darshinan avoda tama v'lo avoda sheyesh acharei avoda. All of the avodas that we listed in the Bryce and the previous Amud, they are all avodas that there's an avoda after. They're not the final, they're not the completion of the avoda. And the halacha that there's a chiyuv, let's say mishum zarus, for example, is only when it's avoda tama, when it's the final avoda. V'chol hani yesh acharei avoda. That's what all these different avodas have in common that were mentioned. They all have avoda after them. They're not the final avoda. Yotzek ubola ushar avodos de mincha, for example, when it comes to the pouring and mixing and other avodos that you'll do with the karban mincha, yesh acharei avoda de haktoras hakometz achar kulan, you're going to burn the fistful after all of that, so that's the final avoda. Misader hashulchan avoda achrona shalechem aponim hainu silik bazichin v'haktarosim. When it comes to the misader hashulchan, to arranging the shulchan in the Beis HaMikdash, that last avoda of the lechem aponim is when you remove the bazichin and burn them. And hamedav es haneros hamidashnam shacharis yesh acharei hadlokas arvis. When it comes to the menorah, so what you're doing in the morning is really not the final avoda, because you're going to have after that, that's what you're doing in the morning, but that's preparing it. But when it comes the evening, so then you're going to have the hadlaka, then you're going to have the lighting. And mekabel damim, let's say you receive the blood, so yesh achar of zrika, so there's an avoda after that as well, which is zrika, which is throwing it. V'lo mishum tumah, and again, when it comes to all of these avodos, you're not going to have that liability of tumah. Kohen tamei sheshimesh. If you have a Kohen who's tamei and he serves in the Beis HaMikdash, and again, that's the whole discussion. That's why we're bringing this brisa. And Rashi continues and explains the zaros v'shimash betuma. If a non-Kohen serves, or let's say a Kohen serves betuma mechad kranafki, that's all learned from one pasuk. Azhara ditu. The Azhara for those is learned from one pasuk. V'perakal azvachim tanina b'shchitas kachim. That's a Meseches azvachim v'nazrim yikadshe b'nei Yisrael v'lo yechalalu dehainu tuma k'dechsib asrei emor aleim l'dorosechem. That's where the pasuk mentions tuma. V'zar nami minei darshin, and also the pasuk of zar, that's also darshan. The halacha by zar is also darshan from there. Miditzrich kra l'michtav b'nei Yisrael l'mutei mai ilamutei kadshe nachrim v'kadshe nashim v'chi b'tuma karvi v'harminon hasam delo elahachi kamar. What it means is as follows: b'nei Yisrael nami shehem zarim. When you're talking about zarim, lo yavdu, they shouldn't serve. Shlo yechalalu, they shouldn't profane. V'kevan de zaros v'tuma mechad kranafki. If that's all learned from one pasuk, meaning a non-Kohen or someone who serves b'tuma, so man de mechayev azaros mechayev nami atuma. We apply the same rules. Whoever is chayev on zaros is going to be chayev on tuma as well. V'lo mishum mechusar begadim, and also when it comes to all of these particular avodas, there's no liability of mechusar begadim. Din hunami mizaros es rabbi, those also they're included from zaros beperak beis zvachim. That's in the second parak of zvachim. And v'lo mishum shalo rachutz yadayim v'raglayim dechuka chuka mi mechusar begadim gamar la. That's learned out from a gzeira shava from mechusar begadim. And the Gemara continues and brings its proof from the Brisa. HaMekater chayev, we can infer from the Brisa that Mekater, if it would be a final avoda like burning, so then there would be a chayev in terms of all of these things. And again, Tumah was one of the things in the list. And so the Gemara says, my lav, is it not Misa that we're talking here about Misa, and we're saying that there is a chayev Misa b'dei shamayim? And the Gemara says, no, it's not necessarily a proof, because bi azhara. It could be that we just mean to say that there's a warning, there's an azhara, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there is Misa b'dei shamayim. But the Gemara continues, Elazar nami li azhara, but then are you going to say the same thing by zar? If the zar would do a final avod, is it just going to be an azhara? It's not going to be misa. Vaksib, but isn't it written, v'hazara karev yumas? It says that if the zar offers, so then yumas, so then there is a death penalty for that. There is misa b'dei shamayim. And the Gemara says not necessarily a proof. Hakedi isa v'hakedi isa. Could be that each one is different. It could be the inference by zar is referring to misa b'dei shamayim, but the inference by tuma is going to refer to an azhara, to a warning. But the Gemara continues, Mechlal, but that would imply the Yotzik Ubola, that when it comes to Yotzik and Bola, which are mentioned in the Brisa, Lav Namilo, that there's not even a Lav, there's not even an Azhara. If you're going to say that when we're talking about Tumas Haguf, it's just referring to an Azhara and not to Misa B'dei Shamayim, so then the implication would be that again, by Tumas Haguf, by the final Avoda, there's an Azhara, but by Yotzik and Bolel, by Tumas Haguf, apparently there's not even an Azhara. But the Gemara says that cannot be. Vatanya, but we learned in a Brisa, Azhara L'Yotzik Ubolel Minayin, from where do we know a warning by Yotzik and Bolel, if you do those Avodos, Betumas Haguf, that there is a Lav, Talmud Lomer Kedoshim Yu V'lo Yechalalu. The Pasuk says Kedoshim Yu V'lo Yechalu, so we see that there's an Azhara by Yotzik and Bolel, so there must be something more severe when it comes to the final Avoda that's done Betumas Haguf. And the Gemara says to that, it could be not, it could be Midrabanan by Yotzik and Bolel, it really is just Midrabanan, it's not a real Azhara there. Ukra Asmachta B'Alman, the Pasuk that's being brought is just an Asmachta, it's just a hint to the idea, but it's really Midrabanan. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following Brisa. It says, Ve'elu hein shabamisa. It says the following, there's a punishment of Misa B'dei Shamayim, Tamei Shashimesh, a Tamei who serves in the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara says, indeed, to Yufta, that is a refutation. It is clear from this Brisa that a Tamei Shashimesh, there is Misa B'dei Shamayim. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Kufa, returning to what we just said above. This is the brisa that was just mentioned, that said, Ve'elu hein shavamisa tamei shashimesh. This is the full brisa, the full Tosefta. Ve'elu shavamisa, the following, the punishment is Misa B'dei Shamayim. Ha'ochel asat tevel, somebody who eats tevel, that's talking about grain or something where you're supposed to separate truma, and truma was not separated. V'kohen tamei sha'achal truma tahora, let's say you have a kohen who's impure, who eats truma that is pure. V'zor sha'achal asat truma, or a non-kohen that eats truma. V'zor shashimesh, a non-kohen that serves in the Beis HaMikdash. V'tamei shashimesh, somebody who's impure that serves in the Beis HaMikdash. U'tvul yom shashimesh, let's say somebody is tamei, he's a tvul yom, he's waiting for the end of the day to be tahar, but he's not yet fully tahar. If he serves in the Beis HaMikdash, u'mechusar begadim, somebody who serves in the Beis HaMikdash not wearing the proper garments of the kahuna that they're supposed to wear when they serve in the Beis HaMikdash. U'mechusar kapara, let's say you have somebody who still has to bring an atonement in order to be pure, but right now they are not fully pure, they are impure somewhat. V'shelo rachatz yadayim v'raglayim, somebody who serves without washing his hands and feet. U'shesu yayin, somebody serves in the Beis HaMikdash and he drank wine. U'pruei rosh, and somebody who grows out his hair, he doesn't cut his hair properly when serving in the Beis HaMikdash. But the Brisa continues, Avol orel ve'onen v'yoshev. If somebody serves in the Beis HaMikdash and he's an orel, he doesn't have a bris milah, or he's an onen, he's in acute mourning, or v'yoshev, or he serves when he's sitting, einon b'misa, so there's no punishment of misa b'dei shamayim, ela b'azhar. It's just a warning, it's just a violation. And the Brisa continues, Baal mum, let's say a kohen has a blemish, that's a machlokas tanoim. Rebbe Omer b'misa. Rebbe says the punishment there is misa b'dei shamayim. V'chachamim omrim b'azar, and the chachamim say it's a warning. And hazed b'meila. Let's say a person misuses hekdesh and he does it on purpose. Rebbe Omer b'misa. Rebbe says the punishment is misa b'dei shamayim. V'chachamim omrim b'azar, and the chachamim say it's a warning. And the Gemara continues and analyzes the brayso. Ha'ochel asat tevel. It said that if one eats tevel, so he's chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. And all, and from where do we know that? And the Gemara says Diamar Shmuel mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Shmuel says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. Minayin lo ochel asat tevel shu b'misa. From where do we know that somebody who eats tevel is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim? D'chsiv, as it's written, v'lo yechalalu, as kodshei b'nei Yisrael es asher yorimu la'Hashem. What is this pasuk referring to? Ba'asidim litrom hakosim medaber. The pasuk here is talking about food that is going. You're going to take off truma. You haven't yet taken off truma, meaning we're talking about tevel. V'yoliv chilul mitruma, and we have a gzeira shaveh. It says the word chilul over here, and it says the word chilul by truma as well. And we say malahalan b'misa, afkan b'misa. Just like over there, the punishment is misa b'dei shamayim. So too over here, the punishment is misa b'dei shamayim. But the Gemara continues, V'neilef chilul chil mi noser. Why not learn out a gzeira shava chilul from noser? It says chilul by noser as well. And then we would say malahalan b'kares, just like by noser, the punishment is kares. Afkan b'kares, so too over here, the punishment is kares. How do you know that we should learn from truma and not from noser? And the Gemara says, Mistabra mi truma havalei l'meilef. It makes more sense to say that we're going to learn from truma. Shekein truma chutza la'aretz hutra barabim peiros pigel v'noser. These are all things that truma have in common with tevel, tevel. We'll see Rashi in a moment, but since they have all of that in common, it makes more sense to learn that Gzeira Shaveh. But the Gemara continues, Adrab, on the contrary, Minoser Havalei L'Melech. Maybe it makes more sense to learn tevel from Noser. Shekein Psul Ochel Ein Lo Heter B'Mikvah. It has those things in common. Again, we'll see Rashi in a moment, and the Gemara answers to that, Hanoch Nafish. And the Gemara says, when it comes to the things that are in common between Truma and Tevel, there are more things that they have in common, and that's why we learn Tevel from Truma. And the Gemara continues with another answer why we learn Tevel from Truma. Ravina says, Chilul D'Ravim, Chilul D'Ravim Adif. It's better to learn the word Chilul that's in the plural form from another case of Chilul that's in the plural form, and so again, that's why we learn Tevel from Truma. And the Gemara continues, V'kohen tameh she'achal truma tahora minolan. What about a kohen who is impure, who eats truma that is pure? From where do we know that there the punishment is misa b'dei shamayim? And the Gemara says to that, Yamar Shmuel, because Shmuel says, Minayin l'kohen tameh she'achal truma tahora, shuba misa b'dei shamayim. Where's the source? From where do we know that a kohen who's tameh that eats truma tahora, that the punishment is misa b'dei shamayim? Dechsiv, because it's written, V'shamru es mishmarti v'lo yisu olav chet. And we'll take a look at the full pasuk. The pasuk says again, V'shamru es mishmarti v'lo yisu olav chet umesu vo ki yechalaluhu ani Hashem mekadesham, and so therefore it mentions Misa, it mentions Misa b'dei shamayim, and that's where we learn again that a kohen who's tamei, that's the context of the pasuk, that the punishment is Misa b'dei shamayim. And the Gemara continues, Tahora in tamei lo. It sounds like there's Misa b'dei shamayim if the kohen who's impure eats truma that is pure, but if he eats truma that is impure, then that would not be the punishment. And the Gemara says, Da'amar Shmuel, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, because Shmuel says that Rabbi Eliezer says, Minayin l'kohen tamei sha'achal truma tameya she'eno b'misa. From where do we know that a kohen who's tamei who eats truma tameya, that there is no punishment of misa b'dei shamayim? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, umesu bo ki yechalaluhu. It says umesu bo ki yechalaluhu. And we will take a look at Rashi, Pruei Rosh. Again, if somebody serves in the Beis HaMikdash and he lets his hair grow long, Shashimshu, again, they serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Pruei Rosh, what's Pruei Rosh? Sha'avru aleim yosem mishloshim yom. It means it's been more than 30 days, Shalo golchu roshim, and they haven't shaved their head, they haven't cut their hair. Aval orel, but when it comes to an orel, comes to somebody who's not circumcised, Shemesu echav machmas mila. That's referring to somebody whose brothers died because of bris milah, so they weren't able to have bris milah. V'chein onen shashimesh. Let's say a person is an onen, he's in acute mourning and he serves in the Beis HaMikdash. V'chein mishashimesh miyushav, or if he serves in the Beis HaMikdash sitting, t'cholhani kulu kimluhu behu demachli avoda v'erk beis d'zvachim. In all these cases, the avoda is not good. Afilu hachi, nevertheless, lesnu b'misa ela bi'azhara. It's not punished by misa b'dei shamayim, it's just a warning. And then Balmum, Kohen Balmum Shashimesh, that refers to a Kohen who has a blemish that serves in the Beis HaMikdash, and again, that's a Machlokas Tanoim, Rav Yomer B'Misal, L'Kamon Mefarish Pluksayu. The Gemara later on will explain that Machlokas. And Hazid B'Me'ila, let's say misuse of Hektish, that's done on purpose, meaning Nene Min Hektish. He got benefit from Hektish, Sheyesh Bo Me'ila B'Mezid, he did that B'Mezid. And then the Gemara continued and said, Asher Yorimu, this is the source for Tevel, Sha'asidin Litro, it means that Truma will be taken. V'kamar D'lo Yichalum Sha'asr La'achlam B'Tivlam, and we're saying that you're not allowed to eat them when they are Tevel. And we learned that Mitruma, we learned that from Truma, Sha'achla B'Tumah, that's referring specifically to Truma that was eaten in Tumah. T'chsiv, as it's written, Umesu Bo Ki Yechalalu, again it says over there, Misa B'dei Shamayim, so we learn Misa B'dei Shamayim when it comes to Tevel as well. And Rashi continues, the Gemara then said, why don't we learn Minoser from Noser? Ki es Kodesh Hashem Chilal, it uses the word Chilal over there as well, in the singular form. And Rashi continues, Truma, Chutz La'aretz V'chulu, these were things that Tevel and Truma had in common. Rashi says, Simenu, this is an Amanik, Zet Truma, V'zet Truma Mu'reves Bo, this one is Truma, and Tevel has Truma mixed in, so that's in common. V'yein Noagin B'chutz La'aretz, and both Truma and Tevel, they don't apply in Chutz La'aretz, Aval Noser Noag B'midbor V'shat Seter Abamas B'chol Mokom, but Noser, when it came to leftover Hektish, that applied in the Midbar. It also applies when there was heter habamos, when there were bamos everywhere. V'yesh heter lisuro, also Truma and Tevel, there's a way of mattering them. Zeyesh heter lisuro b'hafrasha, v'zeyesh heter lisuro d'Tevel mutter. But Truma, again, you can separate the proper Truma, it becomes mutter. Avol noser ein heter lisuro, when it comes to something that's noser, hektish that's noser, there's no way to permit it. And zen nemar bo chilul b'loshen rabim v'lo yechalalu. This one it says the word chilul in plural. V'zeh b'loshen rabim ki yechalalu it also. By that one it says it in plural. Avol noser, but when it comes to noser, loshen in Yachid Kodesh Hashem Chilal, it's said in singular. And Pigul v'Noser, and the Gemara then said also that Pigul and Noser is in common. Ein Noeg lo b'tevel v'lo b'truma. There's no Pigul and there's no Noser by Tevel and Truma. Ela b'kachim, that only applies to Kachim. It only applies to things which are Karbanos. Shekein Psul Ochlin, but then the Gemara said that another thing that is in common is Psul Ochlin, meaning Noser v'Tevel. That's something that Noser and Tevel have in common. Both Noser and Tevel, Shneim Psul HaMeichel. That's something that's wrong with the food. Noser is left over. That's something wrong with the food itself. And Tevel also is something you didn't separate Truma. Avol Truma Psul HaGufu, but when we're talking about Truma over here, we're talking about somebody who's Tameh who eats Truma. That's talking about the person being Tameh. So that's something that Noser and Tevel have in common that Truma does not. Tevel v'Noser ein lam tahara b'mikvah. Also, Tevel and Noser, you can't purify them in the mikvah. Avol Tameh b'Truma yesh lo tahara b'mikvah. But a person who is Tameh, which is what we're talking about by Truma, that person can make himself pure in the mikvah. Shenemar v'shamru es mishmarti. The pasuk says v'shamru es mishmarti. And this was the source for Misu B'dei Shamayim by a Kohen who's Tameh, who eats Truma. La Kohanim Tameim, Dibar HaKosav. Again, this was to Kohanim Tameim. But Parshas Emer, Ishish Mi Zera Aaron. It talks about Zera Aaron, the Kohanim. And so again, when you have a Kohen who's Tameh, who eats pure Truma, there's Misu B'dei Shamayim. And then the Gemara said, Tahora in, that's only true if it's pure Truma. Milsa Be'ape Nafshi, this is its own independent teaching. V'koyad Shmuel, it's going on Shmuel, Damar Tameh, Shachal Truma Tahora. Ka'amar Tahora Dafka. We're talking specifically about a Kohen who's Tameh, who eats Truma that is tahor. There specifically we say that there's a punishment of misa b'dei shamayim. Avol tameya la'av misa. But let's say you have a kohen who's tamei who eats truma tameya, it would not be misa b'dei shamayim. Imachla b'tumas haguf, even if the kohen ate it when he himself was tamei. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Gimel Amid Beis.